The Blu-ray menu for this movie is the plane hitting the terminal, which is such a strong start, honestly. This movie dropped in 2008 and is set in an American airport getting attacked, which feels spiritually brave, but maybe it wasn't that big a deal. It's set 7 years after Raccoon City from Resident Evil 2 and 3, and a lot has happened. Umbrella collapses, bioterrorism is on the rise, the president resigns, Will Pharma is the new evil drug company, and this is all told to us via overwhelming TV news montage. It's just one hit after another. Claire Redfield of Resident Evil 2 fame arrives fresh off the plane and is met by one of her co-workers, and Ronnie, her co-worker's niece, who is also there, and who simply refers to Claire's co-worker as Aunt because I don't think she has a name. There are protests outside because a shady senator is arriving at the airport. Hello, Ron. Gah! And Claire says it, quote, really brought the wacko circus to town while looking at some of the most NPC-looking people ever and talking to this British guy who will be important later. As the senator is leaving, they encounter a zombie and then it devolves into chaos. And then, as that's happening, an airplane also full of zombies hits the terminal. The door opens for them and everything. It's my favorite, it's the best. Claire, Ronnie, and the senator and a few randos are sheltering in the VIP lounge when Special Agent Leon S. Kennedy takes Rise Kujikawa and Steve Bloom to the rescue. There's a very confusing scene on the way there where Angela runs off and Leon and Greg randomly have beef about it despite initially reacting to the situation the same way. These movies always have a military person who has zombies blatantly explain to them go and run into danger to help someone clearly infected because it all went over their head. Leon and Claire reunite, and then Leon's plan is to walk out the front door. He's so cool. Greg dies at the 26-minute mark. R.I.P. Greg, gone too soon, you only lived 12 minutes. We get a decent action scene, obsessed with the way Leon looks at this zombie while it lunges at him, and maybe the best shot in the entire movie here. I love Claire Redfield. She then gives the gun back to Leon after this, which, I think we want her armed. Specifically. She's better at this than the actual soldiers. Meanwhile, the senator runs off by himself and totally screws over Ronnie, but then Claire saves her. Don't ever say this movie isn't deep, it has things to say. Everyone makes it outside and Claire gets to slap Ron in the face. Yay! There's suddenly something very bizarre going on between Angela and Leon. Leon and Claire then have a short heart-to-heart during which Leon does not move an inch from where he is planted. Things were getting too slow, so several trucks full of the vaccine spontaneously explode. Angela realizes her brother might be connected and decides to go look for him. Leon wants to come too, but he's super weird about it. The cast splits off into suspiciously heterosexual pairings with Leon and Angela going after Curtis, Angela's brother, and Claire and Frederick, the British guy from earlier, going to get the vaccine data. Leon and Angela find Curtis's house in flames, and Frederick demonstrates his driving skills. He tells Claire how the roof of the building is held up using a difference in air pressure, which I'm sure won't come up later and does not mean that this building will be a major action movie set piece. Angela gives a ton of Curtis backstory, and Leon is just fucking standing there. Again, this is all he does this movie when he's not firing a gun. Compared to all the movies after this and the games, Leon has absolutely no personality in Degeneration. No one-liners, just stoic in a really weird way. Unfair, give him back to me. Angela talks for a really long time too, and Leon doesn't so much as twitch. He does not budge at all. Frederick gives Claire a bunch of sensitive information and then immediately leaves the office. Claire calls Leon to tell him to come over to the action set piece building, and then gets a beautiful phone call from Frederick in which he says, "Oh no, there's a time bomb!" And then it instantly goes off.
We need to get out of here. There's a time bomb here.
Claire?
Chekhov's time bomb. If you set up a time bomb, it has to go off immediately. Claire barely lived too. Oh my god, that was a close one. Anyway, remember how this very sensitive facility has air pressure as structural support? It's probably still not important. This might also be a good time to mention that Frederick has the same English voice actor as Itachi Uchiha. Claire gets minorly injured and Leon and Angela show up very, very quickly. Curtis takes the G-virus, which is the horror movie game final boss disease, and ambiguously and conspicuously refers to another person being behind everything without saying his name to maintain some sort of narrative tension, I suppose. Thank you, Curtis.
Of that horror here, in the town where I was born and raised. That's why he left me. That's why he blew up this place.
Leon finds Claire and gets her to the central elevator where she gives him a wink, and Leon shows human emotion for the first time in the entire movie. Claire heads up to the control room to hit some buttons, and I do think it helps. The military shows up to fight Curtis, and then the only black person with a speaking role dies after 4 seconds of screen time because this is an action movie from 2008. The building has measures to soak everything in ethanol and ignite with all exits sealed regardless of who's inside, which normally would be goofy, but this is the building with the zombie virus inside, so I get it. Leon and Angela jump away from the explosion and into some water and proceed to share the most random and confusing underwater kiss I've ever had the confusion of witnessing. Then everything explodes and the ceiling falls. There's this aggressively heterosexual framing, like, come on. The dramatic hand on the chest, is that really essential? Angela hasn't really gotten to do much of anything thus far, and then we just go back to fighting Curtis. Meanwhile, Claire in the control room says, "What would Leon do?" and then switches everything to manual. Perfect, no notes. Then we get a POV "you're in the fan and vents" shot. Leon takes off his jacket off screen, Resident Evil 4 style, which, thank you very much, Capcom. But also, why did he do that? Leon does a bunch of Mission Impossible running through a Mirror's Edge level, and they end up hanging from a catwalk over a chasm in classic Resident Evil fashion. The obviously evil British guy who keeps making timely escapes is predictably behind everything. He smokes now, so we know he's bad news. Claire and Leon confront him on a cliff somewhere, and Leon is in charge of operating the headlights for dramatic effect. They catch him right away with minimal resistance, and Angela finally gets to do something.
And smart women like money.
Angela's outfit at the end sucks, and I hate it. She and Leon share an empty scene where I think some chemistry was supposed to be, and then everybody goes their separate ways. And the credit song is Guilty by Anna Tsuchiyo, whom I love, and also did the voice of Nana Osaki from Nana. She also does another ending credit song for Resident Evil Damnation, Carry On, which is also quite good. This movie has elements of corporate corruption, greed, how the government handles public health crises, how the people who make the decisions that kill thousands often walk away unscathed. It's funny to me when people say these movies are shallow or empty because, well, we can certainly argue about the execution. Like, seriously. The movies themselves tend to be extremely political and critical of massive corporations and presents the US government and military as mixed when it comes to competence and morality. The heroes are consistently special agents acting relatively independently, not the US military system itself. This is true in Damnation especially since Leon fully goes rogue from the US in that movie. They're less military propaganda and more Leon propaganda. When I say this movie has themes, I do mean that in a very baseline way, however. The how and why and the details of corporate overreach into public health and government power is not truly dissected or interrogated in any meaningful way. It exists as more part of the setting and a passive reality of America, which in some ways is actually accidentally thematically genius.
We're gonna wake up in the United States of Generica. Who are you?
Leon and Angela have a 0.0 on the chemistry scale, and it's bad. Compared to what he usually has going on with Ada, it's even worse. It's hurt partially by the fact that they characterized Leon as more cold and serious, which I don't think works for him at all. Leon should always be a little bit irreverent and corny. This is set right after Resident Evil 4, and Leon's got his spunk back by Resident Evil 6 and all the other CG films, so it's narratively kind of just like he got temporarily zapped by the Mission Impossible protagonist Jason Bourne's stoicism laser for only 90 minutes. The character was kneecapped by the writer's desire to make him a top. Ada runs the show when it comes to the two of them, and we all know it. I think the desire to make Leon seem masculine and in control and stoic come from a very capital G gender place, very male action hero. But in every single game that Leon is in, that Ada is also in, she's 5 steps ahead and controlling the pace of every interaction. Leon is hyper-competent, sexy, a little weird, and definitely a bottom. I think this dissonance in his characterization in Degeneration is what's causing him to just stand there so much. They were so committed to making him nonchalant and composed that he landed in alien pretending to be human whose feet got glued to the floor territory. Which could be fun characterization, for someone else. Leon is generally a little less fun in the movies, but still noticeably enthusiastic about one-liners.
I will make you pay for killing my father.
Your dad was kind of a dick.
Whereas in Degeneration, he doesn't get in a good one even once. There's something a little bit joyless about the depiction of heterosexual masculinity in action franchises that power washes any distinct personality out, and I think Leon is a pleasant change of pace from that. Goofy, sassy, and a little pretty in the face. He's horrible at driving and is a pretty empathetic, bleeding heart type. Leave the hypermask alpha dog stuff to Chris Redfield.
HQ, this is Alpha Leader.
This is Alpha
Location
Leader.
on 801.
The way gender is depicted in action and horror stories is often exaggerated in very obvious ways, in survival horror specifically, which Resident Evil technically is, even if it leans John Wick sometimes. You can see it most clearly in the fashion. Male fashion often focuses on being the everyman, while female fashion focuses on emphasizing vulnerability. There are some exceptions to this rule, like in characters like Claire Redfield and remake Jill, and sexy action hero Leon. The classic early 2000s horror girl is embodied more by Ashley from Resident Evil 4. But emphasizing the female protagonist's vulnerability can be either beneficial to the story's theme or voyeuristic depending on the execution. Haunting Ground and Silent Hill F are examples of that emphasis to enhance the horror and narrative. Fiona being forced to wear the dress by the monsters in the castle because she starts the game literally naked and has no other option, and the game dealing then with the topic of bodily autonomy. Hinako wearing the school uniform to symbolize her youth and her past and her lack of choice, and how she feels her freedom is slowly being torn away from her. It can be more weird and voyeuristic in some games, like aspects of Fatal Frame or the third Parasite Eve game specifically. A lot of the guys have a very Pacific Northwest David Lynch kind of thing happening. Harry Mason, James Sunderland, Ethan Winters, Alan Wake, Lee from The Walking Dead. That's survival horror, right? That counts. The fashion emphasizes a mix of practicality and gloominess in both cases, however, usually. Some of the girls' outfits are awful, but most of the time they're fine. For the horror girls, the outfit notoriously contains a pair of tall brown boots with a low heel, and I am a certified tall brown boot lover, so I'm all for this. But it's usually combined with a dress or a skirt or an outfit with an overall more preppy and feminine look. Sometimes leans Victorian or a smidge schoolgirl or full-on school uniforms. Think Clock Tower, Rule of Rose, Haunting Ground. Youth plus femininity is a shorthand for vulnerability because, society. So it shows up as a prominent character design trope in survival horror that emphasizes helplessness or running away over combat. Generally speaking, the less vulnerable a protagonist is meant to be, the less feminine coded their design is. Generally, not always. This often goes hand in hand with games focusing on bodily autonomy or abusive family or abusive authority figures or assault in the story, as femme people can sometimes be disproportionately impacted by those things, so it enhances an overall horror and desperation and relatability and the power dynamics of certain situations. The masculine coded designs share the gloomy plus practical combo, but with less vulnerability because the practical elements are more dominant. Jeans and a sturdy jacket and a belt for good measure. In fact, half the male protagonists I listed earlier were trying to find or save their wife or daughter, or both. Hi, Ethan. There's still an element of the feminine introduced to add tension, and you guessed it, vulnerability. Actually, every man I listed has some version of this, and I didn't even realize it at first while I was writing. I'm personally not as big a fan of this narratively, not that it can't work at all. I think Resident Evil 4 does well enough because Ada is there to balance the scales, but compared to games like Rule of Rose or Haunting Ground, where the protagonist being a semi-powerless girl/young woman is thematically important or essential to the story the game is trying to tell, the ambient woman in jeopardy that needs to be found or saved in other survival horror games is less compelling because it plays too hard on the audience instinctively assuming that woman equals weak and vulnerable. Tests of endurance and survival tend to be something women are actually quite good at, and I think a lot of survival horror scenarios are situations that an able-bodied semi-athletic adult of any gender would have relatively similar chances of surviving. The more drastic differences in advantage are whether or not someone is an adult or a child, combat trained or civilian, or able-bodied or injured or disabled. So what I'm saying is we need a femme lesbian searching for her missing butch wife in a survival horror game, or a game where the husband gets kidnapped for once. Leon frequently getting saved by Ada in multiple games is another nice subversion in his character to the male action hero mold. Ada is kind of single-handedly responsible for Leon surviving Resident Evil 2 and 4, arguably 6 too. Leon and Ada's dynamic as a whole, and the fact that there's never a one-up moment that disempowers Ada and humbles her that so many promising heterosexual romances with competent women end up having, is important to me. Mass design can sometimes signal an emphasis on the survival part, while femme design can signal a focus on the horror part of the genre. Both retain both elements but highlight a different aspect. Think Fiona having nothing but a dodge and a run versus James Sunderland's indestructible tactical combat 2x4. Leon can fight in Resident Evil 4 and Ashley cannot. Exceptions to this rule include Hinako, which I would argue is not only an exception but an intentional subversion. Dressed femme/schoolgirl but combat heavy. Heather Mason arguably too, and I think her design is relevant to the bodily autonomy/pregnancy stuff going on in Silent Hill 3 more so than vulnerability specifically, but I digress. Aya Brea from the first Parasite Eve is more combat survival focused than horror vulnerability, so she gets dressed in a more mask-coded way for much of the game. When she is dressed more femme at the beginning of the game, it's a much more formal and mature outfit than the standard horror game girl look. Resident Evil girls other than Ashley broadly don't follow this pattern because of the series' focus on action, so there isn't a goal of making the protagonist feel weak in the first place, although playable Sherry from Resident Evil 2 Remake brings us back to this place a little bit. Anyway, I'm getting a bit too far into the weeds with the whole femininity associated with vulnerability means that gender is represented in horror and horror-adjacent media in very particular ways thesis, so we're going to course correct back to Leon now, but just know gender is haunting the narrative. Leon falls a little outside this dichotomy and into action hero territory, as previously mentioned, and the dress code and behaviors get even stricter than the survival horror archetype. Action heroes aren't usually allowed the fear or the misery afforded to a horror protagonist, nor anything other than 1. A suit, 2. A t-shirt and jeans, or 3. Tactical gear. Leon's fun extends to his breaking of this norm too. He still wears practical clothing, but in RE4 and RE6 specifically, he's more dripped out in a fun way. I think this movie is decent and entertaining, but its biggest flaw in my opinion is far and away the fact that Leon is reduced to a generic caricature of masculinity from his previously much more interesting disposition. All he's missing is a dead wife, and there's no shortage of those in these films, let me tell you. Vendetta and Damnation both have a dead wife plotline that involves a wife dying from a politically motivated bombing, which is a funny thing to put in your movies twice in a row. Typically, Leon's not a violent or angry person. His life mission is to save lives and tends to avoid physically harming anyone in any way if they aren't a zombie or causing the zombies. He's generally nicer and calmer than a lot of the other equivalent male protagonists inside Resident Evil as a series. In Resident Evil 6, he follows along with Helena and covers for her seconds after meeting her for the first time, and despite the fact that she won't actually tell him anything. In Resident Evil 4, he doesn't just rescue Ashley, but is emotionally present and comforting for her in a lot of scenes. He basically refuses to hurt Ada no matter what extremely suspicious behavior she's got going on, even when there's an evil clone of Ada running around killing innocents. He still chooses to protect her despite not understanding what was going on at all. In basically every game he's in, Leon represents in some way a level of emotional reassurance for the other characters. Yes, he's funny and hot, but also genuinely a good person and cares deeply about the lives of others. He's remarkably emotionally stable and kind given all he's endured. The movies in general have a habit of characterizing Leon as a little bit more smarmy and asshole-ish across the later 3 films in contrast to the cold brick wall of Degeneration and the more robust, kind-hearted characterization of the games. It's like the spiritual power of the male action hero was encroaching on his aura or something. If we look at Resident Evil 6 specifically in a bit more depth for a moment, because I think that's a good point of reference for the CGI film, since Resident Evil 6 is about the most overtly action movie that the games ever get, it is pretty squarely more action than horror. What are we doing, man? I think Leon's representation is particularly interesting within Resident Evil 6 because we do get 4 separate campaigns and a lot of different characters and a lot of different protagonists. So we have Leon and Helena, we have Chris and Piers, we have Jake and Sherry, and then we have just Ada. Just Ada by herself. And compared to the other male protagonist in Resident Evil 6, Leon is far and away the calmest and the nicest and the most emotionally present, right? Chris and Piers and Jake all have a habit of like yelling and hitting things and just displaying a little bit more physical aggression and a little bit less emotional vulnerability and kindness, at least not as consistently as Leon. They still have their moments, but they have their moments. Leon is like that all the time. Jake specifically is very nice to Sherry as the game progresses. He's much more emotionally invested and kind and looking out for her well-being, especially as you get to like the last few chapters of his campaign. But he is still generally pretty physically aggressive and doesn't display that level of softness to anyone else in the story. And Chris is the worst out of everybody in Resident Evil 6 because Chris is just the worst in Resident Evil 6. He's so awful. He's just so mean.
You're here to pour drinks and look pretty. So how about you shut your mouth?
Whoa. Yeah, get his
Get the
ass.
hell out of my bar.
Yeah, fuck him up. It's like a whole thing. It's like his whole character thing is that he's just like a huge asshole for 3 hours and then he decides to spontaneously get over it. It's not very good. The differences in the representation of physical aggression and masculinity across the three main points of Leon, Chris, and Jake, and also secondarily Piers, who also sometimes has an issue with being a little bit too aggressive, is that Leon is significantly more level-headed and calmer, as are most of the female characters. Ada is far and away the most zen, obviously, because she's Ada. All of this is in fact related to the way Leon is overwhelmingly popular with women, while Chris Redfield is not. Not that no women like him, just like comparatively. Plus, Leon in turn seems to genuinely like the women he's around.
Women.
He pays attention to them and takes them seriously and helps them out and tells them jokes and is concerned with their mental and physical well-being. In short, he generally treats women like people. I don't think Leon has ever been in a game where he wasn't primarily paired up with at least 1 or 2 women. Once you look, you notice that Leon is usually overwhelmingly spending his time interacting with women across the franchise. In RE2R specifically, I think the only man he has a two-way conversation with is the dying cop and maybe Sherry's dad, briefly. But that's it. Every major character interaction or relationship he has in that game is to Ada, Claire, Sherry, or Mrs. Birkin, Dr. Birkin, Sherry's mom. In Resident Evil 6, he spends all his time talking to Helena, Hunnigan, and Ada, and only very briefly talks to Simmons, the president, during a flashback, and has 1 scene with Chris. He doesn't even meet Chris until Resident Evil 6, I don't think, and excluding the movies, and counting only the main games, I think Chapter 4 of Resident Evil 6 is the only time Chris and Leon are ever in the same scene, period. Leon has a warmth, humor, and trustworthiness that is character defining to me, and my point here is that Degeneration misunderstood everything that made Leon beloved and gave us this cement block of a man instead, but at least it was kind of funny. As far as quality goes, Degeneration is probably the last place among the CGI films. It's very entertaining, but sometimes on accident. Damnation, Vendetta, and Death Island are probably superior in terms of quality, but this movie did Leon so weird I had to talk about it.